What's up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Griff, and welcome to my tanking guide for patch 8.0 and beyond. Now, this specific guide is going to be geared towards new players who are looking at becoming a tank right now and what they should be doing. So let's start this off with the one question that should be on your mind if you actually want to become a tank, and that's, why should I become a tank? The first thing that you need to realize is being a tank is actually very convenient. It can be a lot easier to get into the content that you actually want to do, and that's mainly because there's a huge demand for good, competent tanks. And number two, you should become a tank because there is plenty of room to easily distinguish yourself from everyone else. Mediocrity is the norm for tanks. A lot of tanks are very complacent to just do the bare minimum, and with some extra effort, you can not only distinguish yourself easily, but also create a lot of connections that can get you into some really awesome content and also a really awesome guild. So, how do you become a tank? First thing you gotta realize is, tanking isn't as hard as you think it is. Trust me, yes, there's absolutely more responsibility than a DPS, but that is only on a surface level, and in all honesty, I don't think it's that much of a difference. I honestly think being a tank doesn't require that much extra responsibility. As you tank, you'll end up learning a lot of the responsibilities that you have, and your role naturally and instinctually as you begin to actually just do it. To a certain extent, there's only so much that you're going to pick up from a guide, whether you read it or watch it. So don't be discouraged, because the other stuff that you need to learn is really small nuanced stuff that you'll just get from experience. Stuff like actually properly positioning or how fast you should be moving in a dungeon. All that stuff you will pick up over time. Now is the absolute perfect time to start to get around to learning a new class or role, because the expansion's at a close and everything is winding up for BFA, especially now that the BFA pre-patch is out. So, what's the first thing we need to look at as far as a tank is concerned? That is going to be setting up your UI. You need to make sure that everything you need to know about is centralized, so things like your health bar, your target, your weak auras, and your boss timers need to be somewhere in the center of your screen. It does you absolutely no good to have UI elements outside of your immediate vision, because if you're having to take your vision off what's going on in front of you, your character is going to end up standing in things you shouldn't be standing in, or you're going to end up messing up a mechanic or messing up your positioning, which will honestly most likely end with you being dead if it's a progression fight. Clearing up your UI will help you to be able to see everything going on around you, and it's going to lead to you avoiding more mechanics and over pulling an extra mob if it's about to walk into you. Keep in mind, this change will probably take you a little bit of time to adjust to, but it's absolutely worth it. And even if you decide that you don't want to tank, I recommend that you keep a UI similar to this, because it's going to allow you to play at a higher level. The second thing in regards to UI is that add-ons are your friend. Honestly, add-ons are a lot simpler than a lot of people make them out to be. And on top of that, there's plenty of content out there on the web, whether that be YouTube or wago.io, to help you format your UI or your add-ons exactly the way that you want it. So the two things that I'm going to say you need to 100% have as a tank in terms of add-ons are going to be some sort of boss mod. You need to use them. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. So you can either choose bigwigs or you can choose deadly boss mods. Both of them serve the same function, and they both can do the exact same thing. It's just they're set up a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, pick one. And I'm going to say pick whichever one the people that you do content with use. The second add-on that you need is going to be weak auras, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to track things like abilities, cooldowns, debuff timers, etc. It allows you to track all of those things, including your secondary resources or your primary resources, and you can move it wherever you want. It's 100% customizable. It's a great add-on. It's a little bit in-depth, but going to the website wago.io, wago.io, will allow you to see what other people have created, and you can look through hundreds of different profiles profiles of what people have created, and you can just easily copy it, import it into your WeakAura with a paste, and hit import, and it's right there. It's set up directly for you exactly how it shows. So where do you start as a tank? Number one, you need to pick a class and a spec. So that first step might seem extremely simple and obvious to you, but each tank is going to play relatively differently, and all have areas where they excel a little more than others. So this is actually a fairly important decision. I would highly recommend, if you have several alts, to kind of just feel around and get an idea of how they all play, and kind of find a particular style that you like and go with that. It's always going to be better to get a little bit of experience with them first and choose it based off of that. At the end of the day, you shouldn't really be picking for which tank is the quote-unquote best at the time, because that's going to change from patch to patch, and in all honesty, it's not going to matter all that much unless you are in a bleeding edge guild pushing a world first, because from what it's looking like, every tank is going to be viable in Battle for Azeroth. Now, the second addendum to this is Icy Veins and Class Discords are your friends. Both are amazing resources that are available and perfectly able to help you in picking talents and getting solid advice if and when you have questions, because you're going to. You will absolutely have questions, there's no doubt about it. These outlets will help you learn nuances in what type of defensives or utilities are useful on a fight-to-fight basis, which can really set you apart from others. But you're probably asking at this point, but when do I actually start tanking and learning? And all I gotta say to that is, get into random dungeons. I really can't emphasize this enough. It's going to start exposing you to everything you can expect to deal with as a tank, and it'll show you a lot of the types of mechanics and encounters you can start to expect to deal with, especially since Blizz has a trend of using scaled down or similar abilities in dungeons that you'll see again later in a raid, but it'll be scaled up or a little bit more important, etc. You will honestly see that pattern in Battle for Azeroth. They did it with Legion, and I guarantee you they will do it with Battle for Azeroth. This is also going to let you get exposed to all different kinds of people and levels of skill. So it's going to help you learn how to adapt and properly lead and pace different groups, but we'll talk more on this soon. Now, what's expected of you as a tank? Most people will tell you two things. Number one, you need to hold aggro. Pretty simple and obvious, yeah? Kind of. You're supposed to hit things and make them hit you back, but with the advent of the pre-patch, this isn't quite as easy as it was beforehand, but we'll cover that in a bit. And the second thing that they'll tell you is you need to stay alive. Again, something that really seems pretty obvious, but to be completely honest, in my opinion, I'm going to tell you that outside of those two things, there's more that you can do. There's actually a lot more if you want to do more than just the bare minimum. If you want to be more than just a meat shield that does just enough to get by and want to feel like you accomplished more than the bare minimum and have the opportunity to do some really cool things that people will actually notice and talk about, then pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. If you have any intent to do higher content and even maybe have aspirations to become a tank for a raid team, these things that I'm about to tell you are key to accomplishing those goals. In a raid, there's only two tanks. In a Mythic Plus, there's only one. So it's a highly competitive field to break into because of the limited amount of slots. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is you're not just a meat shield. Once you're at a point in terms of gear where you're simply no longer gaining any real benefit to stacking more of your survival-based stats, you will start to gain far more benefit from stacking stats that will boost your DPS. This is now even more important, seeing as in Battle for Azeroth, the tank threat has been reduced to 4 times as much of a DPS as compared to the 10 plus times that they had in Legion. So if you look at tanks right now at current gearing levels, they can almost become an extra DPS, and they're perfectly capable of putting out good amounts of DPS. In AoE pulls, they can even be pulling just as much, if not more DPS than actual DPS players. Demon Hunters are great examples of this, as are monks. Even if you subscribe to the idea that tanks don't need to actually deal higher damage than the bare minimum, it will negatively impact your ability to start doing higher content if that's your goal. For example, if you want to do higher Mythic Plus keys, Every little amount of extra DPS could be the difference between pushing or depleting a key. Not to mention you're outputting less threat than you used to, which means you can't just simply rely on doing the bare minimum. Otherwise, you'll be constantly losing aggro. So if you want to do anything past casually doing some heroics and keys, you are going to have to start looking into pushing your class as far as you possibly can. Not only because you have to in order to be successful, but because you'll end up finding enjoyment and feel accomplished by doing so. To piggyback off that point, for certain classes, if you are not maximizing your output in terms of damage, for example, like a Prot Warrior, or a Brewmaster Monk, or a Prot Paladin, you are actually ending up reducing your overall defensive capability because these sort of tanks actually gain defensive benefits from doing their rotation properly. For example, when a monk is doing their rotation properly, they are reducing the cooldown of their brews. So it's very important that you read up on your class and understand your class and actually do push your class to its limit. Now, the second thing I'm going to tell you is you're the leader of the group, but not the way that you think you are. A lot of people think that when they're the tank, that they're the ones who call the shots and make all the group decisions. But it's really not that way. You're the leader in the way that someone leads a group run. You're not there to assert your dominance. You're there to take them on a route and at a pace that they can keep up with. As a tank, you can grab huge packs of mobs, but it doesn't do you or the group any good if you're the only one who can stay alive. It's your job to read the DPS and healing ability of the group and make pulls according to that. If your group has super high DPS, there's no reason to make small pulls that will overall make the group go through slower. If the group is good for a sprint, then you should adopt a sprint. Taking this a step further, if you have a stud of a DPS that's killing it and is starting to get impatient and pull for you, don't try and adopt a holier-than-thou attitude and tell him that if he wants to pull, he can tank it. This only slows down the group, and he probably won't die with current gear levels, and even if he does, it still only hurts the group. At that point, you can probably afford to pull faster and pull more. That being said, if it's getting people killed and if the healer can't keep up with the damage, that's obviously a different story. You need to be able to read these things. As an aside, this is also where you're going to start to gauge how and when to use your defensive cooldowns. If your healer is an absolute boss of a player, outside of active mitigation, you might not need to use your cooldowns, and you can afford to be a little bit more liberal with your usage of them. However, if your healer is struggling, you might need to hold on to them and figure out either through communication or observation and prediction when to best use your own cooldowns. The third thing that I'm going to talk to you about is positioning. Proper positioning can help your group in a lot of ways, and obviously one of the most basic things most tanks can tell you, as a general rule of thumb, is to face things away from the group. But there's more to it than that. Proper positioning of a boss or mobs can do a lot for the group as a whole, and it can make managing ground-based mechanics a lot easier. It can also make the overall run more smooth. As a general rule, you want to try and put yourself in a position where the group can get maximum uptime and cleave, while also trying to maximize the safety of the group. This is honestly probably the hardest thing to give tips on, and it just comes with experience. I call this feelycraft. It's something that you're just going to gain a feel for over time. Just try and always be constantly aware of where you are, what's around you, and where your group is. If you do that, you'll honestly pick up positioning pretty well. I hope these tips can take you where you want to go. If there's anything else you'd like me to cover or have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. Peace.